This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa urges richer countries to release hoarded doses. Business leaders in Zimbabwe to finance purchase of COVID-19 vaccines amid soaring coronavirus cases. And how COVID-19 exacerbated the problem of teenage pregnancy in Africa as thousands of girls failed to return to school. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe, and joining me tonight with the business headlines is Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Libya's oil production recovers to around 1.25 million barrels a day. And we look at how Egypt has used over $8.4 billion from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you.
Thank you, Uche. Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged wealthy countries to ensure equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. Ramaphosa said this while speaking at a virtual meeting of the World Economic Forum. The African Union chairperson says his country, like many other African nations, is struggling to secure sufficient vaccines to start countrywide inoculation programs. Angela Kopla tells us more.
Ramaphosa didn't mince his words when it came to accusing richer countries of hoarding up to 4 times the amount of vaccines needed to protect their populations.
But we need those who have hoarded the vaccines to release the vaccines so that other countries can have them, but also to have financial assistance. And in releasing the vaccines, we're not saying that just give them away. We are also saying, in addition to yes, doing that, we are saying, do make them available so that those countries that do not have access to vaccines right now should have access.
Analysts highlighted the president's position on vaccine nationalism and said it's a repeat of the position the country took around the production of HIV/AIDS antiretrovirals and getting access to the drug licenses to manufacture those drugs locally.
So it's not something new from a South African perspective. What I found quite interesting is that South Africa's taken quite an aggressive stance on this, and it's been joined by countries like India.
There was also a strong emphasis on multilateralism from Ramaphosa.
Obviously, something that South Africa has been involved in last year in its chairmanship of the African Union, also its role on the United Nations Security Council, and the general discourse that COVID is a global problem, but a lot of countries are adopting very unilateral approaches to battling it, imposing their own rules.
Ramaphosa also discussed the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement. He called it revolutionary and the continent's most important initiative ever.
And we actually saw visions of the future with the African medical supplies platform that we set up, because in a way that was like the precursor to the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, because African countries were brought together on this platform and they started procuring medicines, medical supplies together.
Analysts remain skeptical about the early successes of the Africa Free Trade Area.
The stories that we hear about backlogs at border posts, fresh produce not reaching its intended destinations in time, I think it's going to be very hard to get something viable out of the agreements in the near future.
Ramaphosa's speech is considered moderate by most analysts that were surveyed. However, he was firm on the vaccine and vaccine hoarding and also on the opportunities offered by the African Free Trade Area. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Chief Economist Ken Gishinga at Mentoring Consulting joins us now for more on this. Ken, President Ramaphosa highlighted quite a number of issues, including concerns over vaccine nationalism. What did you make of his speech?
Indeed, his speech was quite powerful. You know, he reminded us of the moral failures that sometimes accompany global markets when some countries hoard vaccines more than 5 times their population sizes, while others in Africa do not have enough supplies. So I think it was a good day for Africa at Davos. I think he made a strong plea for Africa on that front. But I would have wanted him to go a bit further. I would have wanted it to be a bit more philosophical and to really ask the fundamental questions. Why is it that African countries are begging for vaccines? What happened to African science? What happened to African manufacturing? All these institutions, if you think of most of these African countries that he's a chairman under the AU, many of them got independence in the 60s, at the same time as the South Koreas of this world. So these are countries that many institutions have fallen under corruption, under mismanagement. So I would have wanted him to go the extra length on really reimagining a new Africa of scientists, of innovators, of designers. And I think that is the one place that he maybe did not achieve.
Right. He also emphasized the need for multilateralism. How can this help to limit the economic impact of COVID-19?
Obviously, when countries can work together in terms of coordinated policy, that can only be beneficial to African countries and globally. And I think he's already made a case for that. But there's always a feeling that some of these multilateral arrangements only seem to benefit big business. The biggest beneficiaries of the globalization on front right now has been big business. And I think there is a renewed agenda to try and focus on the small businesses which hire most of these Africans. 60% of Africa is below 25 years. Many of them need jobs, and many of them can only be absorbed in the small companies. So I think really the future really has to be, how do we get money circulating within the African grassroots to get more younger people employed and on towards that ladder of prosperity.
All right, Ken Gishinga, we appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking to us. Now, South Sudan's government says it has ordered 5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. The country's health ministry says the Gavi Vaccine Alliance will supply the doses. However, it will still be several months before the first vaccinations are carried out. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's health ministry says the vaccine is expected in the country in 3 months' time. The ministry says it has so far tested more than 85,000 people for the coronavirus. More than 3,800 tested positive. It blames logistical challenges for the smaller number of the people tested. It says it is licensing private laboratories to try and test more people for COVID-19. The government says once the vaccine arrives, specific target groups will be inoculated first.
Our target group of vulnerable population include health workers, elderly population, persons with underlying conditions like diabetes, persons living with HIV/AIDS, internally displaced populations.
South Sudan's government says the vaccine will be free of charge and that it will first be administered in government hospitals. Then it will do community outreach to ensure the medicine reaches all targeted groups. The government says it plans to apply for more vaccines to try and cover the country's 11 million population. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
In Tunisia, the health ministry says that 30% of the country's population will be vaccinated against COVID-19 starting April. CGTN's Adnet Shawashi.
Health Minister Fawzi Mahdi said his departments seek to vaccinate 50% of the Tunisian population this year. Health authorities have mobilized 200 vaccination teams.
The vaccine will protect Tunisians and reduce the number of victims and dangerous cases which require intensive care beds and put pressure on hospitals. The vaccine will allow for gradual return to normal life so that the state can manage the negative health, mental, social and economic repercussions on the population.
The remote COVID-19 vaccine registration system EVAX is operational. An app is available on mobile devices or on the website evax.tn. The vaccination registration platform is similar to the one designed for elections.
This system was built in record time, not exceeding 3 weeks. It involved several departments and ministries. Technology is at the service of science and medicine. Our engineers are ready to help in the fight against COVID-19 by organizing the vaccine rollout and a large-scale vaccination operation.
Some 100,000 citizens across the country have already registered on the platform. So far, nearly 80,000 citizens have registered via SMS and 20,000 through the internet.
I have registered because I trust the state and the Ministry of Health. I encourage elderly people to register on the platform so as to benefit from the optional vaccination against the coronavirus.
Tunisia will receive over 6 million shots of the vaccine in April. 2 million doses will be procured directly from manufacturers and 4 million from the global COVAX initiative. According to the COVID-19 task force, the death toll has surpassed 6,300 since the outbreak of the pandemic in the country. Vaccinated citizens will receive follow-ups on their health status through the digital platform and a call center. Abdel Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Zimbabwe is set to buy coronavirus vaccines to inoculate about 2/3 of its population. The shots will be jointly acquired by the government and private companies. It follows a meeting between President Emmerson Mnangagwa and business leaders on Tuesday. According to a proposal, businesses offer to procure double the number of vaccines they need for their employees. They will also make half that amount available to the government for use in high-priority individuals in the public sector. Russia and China want to supply the vaccines. Zimbabwe is also in contact with the global COVAX scheme, which is due to roll out next month. Infections in Zimbabwe have doubled in just the past few weeks, while 4 cabinet ministers and dozens of officials have died from the virus. And still in the country, public services have been paralyzed. This comes as government ordered a near shutdown of operations to minimize the spread of COVID-19 amid a spike in infections. The country is on a tight lockdown, which was imposed in early January. The government announced that only 10% of its employees should report for work. Officials are only attending to emergencies such as issuing of burial orders. Zimbabwe, like many other African countries, initially recorded low numbers of COVID-19, but has recently experienced a spike in cases. There are fears that a new, more infectious variant of the virus came to the country when scores of Zimbabweans living in South Africa returned home for the holiday season.
We are facing a lot of challenges here, and we are spending at least 2 hours to several hours waiting just to get assistance. The more we get crowded here without assistance, the more we get infected with this deadly virus.
With the current problem where there's virtual shutdown of the government due to COVID-19, we are now forced to work online from home. And it's unfortunate that there are no proper systems, because with the coming in of COVID, number one thing that was supposed to be done, especially by government, considering that is the largest regulator and also, enabler of critical functions of our society, critical functions of our nation. They were supposed to go online on most services.
For the latest, let's bring in CGTN's Farai Mokutuye live in Harare. Farai, 4 cabinet ministers and dozens of other government officials have died. Can you paint us a picture of the current situation in the country and how health facilities are coping?
Well, indeed, the situation here is becoming very scary for many ordinary Zimbabweans. You did mention earlier that the deaths had doubled since the beginning of the year. Up to the end of 2020, there were about 400 deaths from COVID-19. In the period between New Year's Day up to today, there are now over more than 1,000 deaths. So that's just how this, these cases have risen in a short space of time. I've spoken to doctors who say 8 out of 10 patients that they attend to at their private surgeries now are COVID-19 cases. So there has been an exponential rise in infections. Unfortunately, when I've spoken to these experts and these doctors, they anticipate that we're likely to see more cases in the coming weeks, and that will put pressure on Zimbabwe's health facilities. Remember, we're already coming off the back of an underfunded health sector, challenges to do with manpower, strikes by doctors and nurses, and now to put on top of all that, we've got this situation with COVID-19 where there are shortages of PPEs, shortages of oxygen, amongst other things. It is a very dire situation. Accessing healthcare as well is very difficult for people here. Private hospitals are charging thousands and thousands of dollars for admission. So many people now very scared, very anxious and not sure what they should do. Many want to stay at home, but they also need to put food on their table. So it is a big dilemma, but indeed very scary and very bleak in terms of the numbers.
And Farai, is this the same variant in South Africa?
Well, at this stage, the government has yet to confirm if it is the same variant. They say that they still need to undertake some investigations, some tests. So they have not come out officially to say indeed it is the variant. I think there is speculation given the proximity that we have to South Africa, given the large number of Zimbabweans that crossed the border from South Africa into Zimbabwe during that festive period. Many people do speculate that it is most likely this new variant that is causing a spike in cases, but officially government yet to confirm that. They still say they are undertaking and carrying out investigations.
Right. So President Mnangagwa has met with business leaders who are offering to help purchase these COVID-19 vaccines. Who are these business leaders and how do they plan to go about it?
Well, a meeting was held, representatives from different sectors of the economy. We have industry, the Chamber of Mines, banking sector, the service industry, all were represented by their various office bearers and officials from their associate bodies, and they are very keen to bring in these vaccines, obviously because of the implications that COVID-19 has had on their own productivity, the cost of having to treat some of their workers. They were already prepared to pay and foot the bill of bringing in vaccines for their own employees, and so what we understand now is that they've struck this deal or put forward a proposal where they will bring in double the number of vaccines they require for their own employees and workers and avail some of that to the government. The government has been cash strapped. It has also been funding a lot of expansion into hospitals to make sure they can cater with the increased number of cases. So a lot of its funds are tied up in trying to improve the health infrastructure and may not have funds to acquire and procure these vaccines that are required. And so now government is partnering with the private sector, which has already assisted in a very big way in the initial stages with PPEs and other equipment like that. So again, the private sector coming in and saying, we were intending to do this, we can increase what we wanted to bring in and try to help you. So as we understand, about 12 million vaccines will be brought in. No timelines have been put forward as yet, but we do know that very soon there will be an initial batch of those vaccines that will be brought in and will be made available to frontline workers and to essential services in the government.
All right, that will definitely come as a relief to some of those frontline workers. Farai, thank you for that update. Farai Mokutuya, live in Harare. And you're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick breather. Coming up. United Nations warns about 14 million Nigerians could face an acute food shortage this year.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Tunisia, the death of a protester sparked further clashes Tuesday as lawmakers prepare to vote on a new government. Hekal Rashdi died on Monday after suffering injuries in clashes this month. The anti-government protests began in mid-January with youth complaining over unemployment and poverty. Prime Minister Mashishi has promised that the new team would concentrate on reforms and improve living conditions. President Kais Saied has rejected the reshuffle, calling it unconstitutional, but Prime Minister Mashishi is expected to win a vote of confidence. Botswana is expecting widespread rainfall in the coming days as a result of Cyclone Eloise that has so far devastated Mozambique. Heavy rains and flooding have also been experienced in South Africa, Zimbabwe and Eswatini. 3 people have been reported dead in Eswatini, while 6 people lost their lives in Mozambique. Authorities are putting the total death toll across southeastern Africa at 12. However, the scale of the damage is yet to be fully assessed. Cyclone Eloise made landfall in Mozambique in the early hours of Saturday. Almost 7,000 people have been displaced as a result and more than 5,000 houses destroyed. The areas affected include the port city of Beira, the capital of Mozambique's Sofala province, and the adjacent Buzi district.
I'm here in the district of Buzi. I've been suffering because of the floods. We're being evacuated to Guaragwara, but we have been waiting for the boat since the day before yesterday. I've been queuing, but I haven't yet been able to board the boat. When we go, we will have to leave everything behind. We only have the clothes we wear, and we don't have a place to stay. We are not doing good because we're suffering. We've been sleeping on the road under the rain.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says about 14 million Nigerians could face an acute food shortage this year. The impact of COVID-19 and insecurity affecting farmers have been identified as some of the major causes. Experts say prompt and pragmatic measures need to be taken to avert the crisis. Correspondent Willie Haza reports in Abuja.
Peter Vonome has been farming vegetables and maize for more than 20 years. He says his last farming season was one of the hardest.
I suffered very low yields because I couldn't get good seedlings, fertilizer and other inputs, plus the fact that I lost a lot of products due to the invasion of some criminal herdsmen.
Prices of vital supplies like fertilizers and pesticides skyrocketed during the lockdown last year. As a result, many local farmers couldn't afford to buy them. And now, the United Nations forecasts that between June and August this year, the country may face a food crisis that could affect millions of Nigerians. Experts say the need for government support for rural farmers cannot be overemphasized.
I think more too has to do with creating structures that could help fund farmers in the agri-industry and how they could get funds to be able to get quality seedlings and as well pesticides and herbicides to be able to promote their crop yield.
Also, insecurity has displaced many farmers. Last year, nearly 80 local farmers in a remote village in the northeast were killed by insurgents while harvesting their products.
The bigger farms don't have such issue because they can provide for their own security. They have support from the government also, and they have access to fund from the government. The small-scale farmers, they are actually the one contributing more than 60% of the food we eat in the country. And those farmers have no security, or there is adequate security that protect them.
But as part of ways to tackle the insecurity farmers are faced with, last year Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari deployed about 5,000 agri-rangers to protect farmers and their investments across the country.
The Central Bank of Nigeria also plans to release about 300,000 metric tons of grains like maize into the Nigerian market. This, it hopes, will make up for the setbacks in food production by farmers and prevent a looming food crisis across the country. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Thousands of Indian farmers protesting against agricultural reforms breached barricades to enter the historic Red Fort complex in the capital Delhi on Tuesday. They clashed with police who fired tear gas to scatter them. One farmer was killed when his tractor overturned in the chaos. The angry crowds swarmed to the city center where the government was holding an annual Republic Day parade of troops and military.
After barging through barricades in the capital's main arteries, convoys of farmers and tractors sped wildly around city roads, forcing police and bystanders to leap for safety. Their demands were loud and clear.
This protest is against the 3 farm laws and laws on minimum support prices, and this parade demonstrates our anger as farmers who are falsely called Pakistani and Khalistani. We believe in our Indian tricolor flag. The flag is our honor and pride. The government should talk to the farmers.
Police said the situation was getting out of control.
Many people followed the designated route for the tractor rally, but there were many other protesters who hurled stones at police, vandalized the police barricades, and tried to run over our people. Some of our policemen were also injured. Such things should not happen in peaceful protests.
About half of India's 1.3 billion people work in agriculture. Unrest among an estimated 150 million landowning farmers worries the government. Farmers are angered by laws they say will help large private buyers at the expense of producers. They have camped outside New Delhi for almost 2 months, posing one of the biggest challenges to Prime Minister Narendra Modi since he came to power in 2014. 9 rounds of talks with farmers' unions have failed to end the protests. A union leader said protesters were planning a march on foot towards the National Parliament on February 1st, the same day the government releases its annual budget. The government says the new regulations enable farmers to sell produce on the open market instead of only through state-run bodies that guarantee a minimum price. Farmers say that leaves them at the mercy of big corporations, and they insist that the government must repeal the laws.
Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has resigned following a cabinet meeting to inform his ministers of his intention. Italian media say Conte is hoping to form a new government after weeks of political turmoil. Italy is struggling to contain the coronavirus pandemic. Turkey and Greece have held their first face-to-face talks in nearly 5 years after months of tensions over competing claims in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Officials from both sides came together in Istanbul on Monday for renewed discussions. The 2 countries are at odds over several issues, including maritime boundaries and energy rights. Mikhail Bardavid has more from Istanbul.
Following the meeting, Turkey's state-run Anadolu agency announced that Turkish and Greek officials had evaluated previous rounds of talks, discussed the current situation, and analyzed possible steps going forward. There are many challenges ahead for Turkey and Greece. One critical dispute is concerning energy exploration rights in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. While Ankara wants to discuss a range of issues, including the demilitarization of some Greek islands, Athens is only willing to talk on matters of demarcation of maritime boundaries.
The importance of these talks really is more in what they prevent than what they're likely to produce. The hope is they'll lead to a decline in tensions and prevent what we saw last year with some very high tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean, leading to a military clash. So I think that's the most we can hope for these talks, is that they will reduce the risk of a full confrontation between Greece and Turkey.
Political analyst Gareth Jenkins also stresses that Turkey has a strong motivation for the resumption of talks.
The urgency for Turkey to agree to the talks now is because you have a new administration in the White House, which is going to be less friendly towards Turkey than the old one. And the EU at the moment is in a process of putting together a new package of sanctions, which is likely to be agreed at the end of March.
Greece recently announced it would extend its western territorial waters to 12 nautical miles. However, Ankara has repeatedly warned that a similar intention in the Aegean Sea would be considered a cause for war for Turkey. So many challenges ahead for the next round of talks planned to take place in Athens. I'm Mikhail Bardavid for CGTN in Istanbul.
Let's now catch up with the day's business news, and Uche joins us with the latest.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Libya's oil production recovers to around 1.25 million barrels a day. And we look at how Egypt has used over $8.4 billion from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And let's start off in Libya. The country's oil production has recovered to around 1.25 million barrels a day. That's after a major pipeline was fixed. Now, the subsidiary state energy company, Waha Oil Company, says output at the Waha oil field has returned to a normal level of 300,000 barrels a day, and that is following repairs. The pipeline can carry around 200,000 barrels of oil each day to the nation's biggest export terminal. And talks are underway to resolve a salary dispute that threatens to stop shipments at 3 major ports. Now, while arguments over pay at Libya's oil fields usually end quickly, the strike underscores the fragility of the country's energy sector after almost a decade of civil war. And in South Sudan, the government says it is in the final stages of beginning a comprehensive environmental audit of its oil-producing regions. The country's petroleum ministry says the aim is to try and reduce pollution resulting from oil production. CGTN's Patrick Oyet with more.
Years of oil production amid civil war have harmed the environment in South Sudan, according to the country's petroleum ministry. The ministry says it has selected 11 international environmental audit firms to carry out assessment in the oil fields. The companies are still going through the bidding process.
The basic reason is to make sure we adhere to international best practices and standard set. And we are making this a public matter because it is already a public concern.
There are reported cases of birth defects and miscarriages among residents in the oil-producing regions in the country. Oil sales bring in 98% of all the revenue of South Sudan as it struggles to rebuild an economy shattered by years of civil war. But experts warn that the petroleum sector is causing a loss of grazing land, and soil and water is getting contaminated. South Sudan's government says it plans to have a company to manage waste resulting from oil production.
Water is what is causing the bulk of the burden on the environment, and this is what we are focusing on. The solid waste also are there, but compared to water, of course, is little compared to water. So at the moment, we have very good plans for us to manage the waste, whether they are solid or liquid or even gaseous waste.
South Sudan's petroleum ministry says it wants to conclude the environmental audit, then offer 14 new oil blocks for exploration with proper guidelines on waste management. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And moving on now, Africa has recorded a total foreign direct investment of $38 billion in 2020, a drop of 18% from $46 billion that was recorded in 2019. Although it was a staggering 38% decrease, Egypt remains a top investment destination on the continent. It has secured the highest influx of FDI with a total inflow of $5.5 billion. Data from the United Nations Trade Association further shows that Nigeria attracted $2.6 billion in 2020, and that's down from the $3.3 billion it received last year. South Africa, a major competitor for FDI inflows in sub-Saharan Africa, attracted just $2.5 billion, and that's down from $4.6 billion, which it secured in 2019. Well, Well, let's look further into Egypt's investments now. The country has also topped the list of beneficiaries from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development for a third year in a row. The London-based financial institution has invested over $8.4 billion in more than 125 projects in the country since 2015. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has announced that Egypt attracted the most investments from the bank in 2020. The North African state received nearly half of the budget allocated to the whole southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. Data shows Egypt accounted for more than €1 billion out of the $2.13 billion of development financing injected into 48 projects across the region.
Egypt is a very fertile land for investments at the moment. It has strong human resources and labor force. It has abundant natural resources. The steps Egypt is taking for economic reforms has been unique and has been reflected in the economic growth rates. The bank works on projects in water waste, fintech, solar energy and agricultural projects, as well as the largest solar energy firm, which is in Aswan, in partnership with the private and public sectors together.
The private sector has received a 58% share of the bank's annual support. With uncertainty still looming large on the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic and related economic downturn, the EBRD has more plans in the pipeline.
Despite the outbreak of the coronavirus, investments did not stop. In fact, they actually increased. The European Bank provided loans to Bank of Misr and the National Bank of Egypt to finance small and medium enterprises to survive the tough conditions resulting from the pandemic. Also, a new approach in Egypt is being implemented to focus on environmentally friendly projects, green projects, clean energy, and clean transportation.
The latest deal struck this week is to support the ailing tourism sector that is reeling from the fallout caused by the coronavirus. Along with government support, a series of training programs, funds and consultancy for tourism entities are being put in place to keep the industry afloat. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And to some international news now. The UK is aiming to go carbon neutral by 2050. And as Kitty Logan now finds out, it is banking on clean energy, including offshore wind farms. Take a look.
It's the future of energy generation. Hornsea 1 is currently the world's biggest offshore wind farm. Giant wind turbines planted in the sea off the northeast coast of England. And next to this will soon be Hornsea 2, even bigger.
It's a completely green energy source, so with no costs to generate. It's 1.4 gigawatts of power. Now, that's enough for 1.3 million homes.
The British offshore wind power industry has taken off in recent years. Shallow waters and high winds create ideal conditions for an energy source helping combat climate change.
You essentially take wind, which has absolutely zero carbon, you turn that into electricity, capturing it in the sea, and then return it to land in a very environmentally friendly way.
UK government subsidies are attracting investment in the sector too.
I think long-term, stable, clear policy has really helped for certainty for investors and also helped to bring those prices down. And that's allowed wind to sort of start taking the share that coal and natural gas were producing.
The government set an ambitious target to power all homes from wind by 2030. The National Grid says last year was already the greenest yet for the country's electricity system, with lowest ever levels of carbon emissions and record highs of wind power. Around 1,500 onshore wind farms also play a vital part.
Onshore wind farms are generally much cheaper and easier to establish, though far smaller. But even a few wind turbines like these can power several thousand local homes.
The ultimate aim is to replace dirty fossil fuels like gas to reach net zero emissions by 2050. That means changes in homes and to national infrastructure.
With wind and with more renewables, we'll need to see more storage, like battery storage. We'll need to see more flexibility allowed by the system. But once all of those things in place, I can't see any reason why renewables and wind in particular wouldn't just grow and grow.
Wind power is now cheaper to produce, creating lower bills for consumers. There's greater acceptance too of turbines on farmland, though conservationists warn of risks for birds and want turbines kept away from migrating flocks. But there is plenty of public support for projects like Hornsey 2, which boost local economies. And as construction of this huge wind farm moves ahead, the government's wind power goals are getting closer. Kitty Logan, CGTN.
Now, Thailand could see 1 million more jobless tourism workers in the first quarter, and that's after its latest wave of coronavirus infections. In response to this, its tourism council is set to propose measures, including a 50% co-pay scheme to retain its workers, as well as utility bill cuts, soft loans, and a 2-year debt moratoria. The proposed co-pay scheme will help some 800,000 people keep their jobs. The state planning agency predicts 5 million foreign arrivals this year, after the number slumped to 6.7 million in 2020 due to the pandemic. Now, Thailand's latest outbreak has seen its overall cases more than triple in the past 6 weeks, reaching 63 of the country's 77 provinces.
เมืองหลักอย่างกระบี่ภูเก็ตสมุย
The major cities such as Krabi, Phuket, Samui and Pattaya rely 80% of their income on foreign tourists. If Thais are able to travel domestically, I think it's time that we should try a travel bubble, or whatever you may call it, such as for the Chinese tourists who have been vaccinated. Again, I would like to say to the whole world that after COVID, you should come to Thailand, because we have everything, nature, the wildlife and everything. We are ready to service everyone who visits Thailand, and we are hungry to host people.
Service you now. We're ready to serve.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but still ahead on Global Business Africa, South African President Ramaphosa raises concern that richer nations may be hoarding vaccine doses. Of course, we'll bring you more on that top of the hour. For now, it is back to you.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. How COVID-19 exacerbated the problem of teenage pregnancy in Africa as thousands of girls fail to return to school.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Nigeria, there are concerns that the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 may prevent scores of children from returning to school. The situation is even worse for the girl child, whose future is already threatened by negative cultural practices. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports.
15-year-old Faith Danjuma was halfway through secondary school when Nigeria imposed a COVID-19 lockdown in March last year. But her new normal is doing the house chores despite schools reopening for a new term. Faith's chances of getting back to school anytime soon are bleak. Both her parents lost their sources of income during the lockdown.
When my mates did school, I feel bad that I'm staying at home while my mates are at school studying. I hope that I get money soon so I can get back to school. I want to be a doctor, but now that I'm not able to resume school, I will lose time and be behind my mates who are continuing with their studies.
my mate.
My child is supposed to resume school, but she cannot resume because there's no money. We don't have money on us now. We're just managing.
Schools resumed late last year following a decline in coronavirus cases. According to the country's Bureau of Statistics, about 59% of children returned to school in October, as against 74% recorded in January of 2020. During the lockdown, nearly half of all school children were totally cut off from learning.
If they continue to forget all that they've learned before and they are not coming to school to learn again, they will reduce in knowledge and it will also affect them. If it continues that way, because we don't know when this is going to last and when things will return to normal, it will affect the nation also because it will lead to some social ills. There are schools that up till now were not able to resume because the government requirements, they were not able to meet up. And if they can go around to help out, fix some things, some requirements in schools and allow school parents to bring their children and help in the aspect of settling the school teacher's salary, it will go a long way.
Nigeria is already burdened with the highest number of out-of-school children. The UN's Children's Agency, UNICEF, says the figure surpasses 10 million. Girls account for 60% of that. In Nigeria, the girl child faces discriminatory practices such as child marriage and forced labor. The problems exacerbated by the economic disruptions of COVID-19. Key players in the education sector want to see more funding and support for education to avoid a generation losing out on learning. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Kenyan schools have recently reopened after a 9-month closure due to COVID-19 pandemic. However, a few weeks in, many schools are reporting a rise in cases of absenteeism. Some of those are linked to early pregnancies. CGTN's Nick Mudimba visited a school in Kitui County and reports on the situation there.
At Makweni Primary School in Kenya's Kitui County, classes are going on. The pupils are adjusting to the new normal. Teachers are on their part trying their best to ensure the syllabus is properly covered given the time they lost to the pandemic. But there's a problem. Many pupils are yet to report back to the school.
You know, we are employed and that we have to come to school. It is our duty to be in school, so we make sure we are in school. So the issue that is there is maybe the pupils not coming, but the teachers report to work, they do their work. But the issue is, you know, the morale may not be there. When you go to class, you find that almost half of the pupils are not in school. But you teach the pupils who are already in school.
From a distance, we notice a middle-aged woman walking towards the school carrying a baby on her back. But that's her grandchild. She has brought the baby for breastfeeding because the mother is a 15-year-old in her final year at this primary school. The mother is trying her best to keep her daughter in school.
I was surprised when I learned that she is pregnant because she's still in school and I want her to continue with her education. But when I saw her pregnant, I was so dejected and surprised.
I want to study and be a doctor. My dream is to reach the university and pursue medicine.
She sits and watches her daughter finish breastfeeding her baby under a tree. The schoolgirl turned young mother then heads back to class, leaving her own mother to walk back home with her young one. The baby's grandmother is hopeful that one day fortunes will change for her daughter, who despite all the challenges she faces is trying to stay in school, where many haven't returned.
If you will look at the daily attendance, which we take on a daily basis, so we find that there are some pupils, they come today, tomorrow you don't get them.
We visit another pupil at her home. She's from the same school and hasn't been back there since the institution reopened. She's 3 months pregnant, but is too embarrassed to go back to school.
After I deliver, I will leave the baby with my mother so that I can go and sit for my final examination.
She carries on with her daily house chores, but she still has hopes of finishing her education, given that her classmates who have delivered children have since resumed learning. 10 months or more out of school, and right now the responsibility of the students and the pupils is all about catching up. Discipline and the consistency is a recipe they need to make sure they also finish the syllabus before the national exams that is coming up soon. So far, for those not in school, the Ministry of Education is trying to bridge the gap, mitigating ways they can actually get back to the classrooms. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Kitui County, Kenya.
And coming up in sports, the International Olympic Committee's executive board to meet virtually on Wednesday.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We start with athletics. The Tokyo Olympics bull